Hey everyone, so welcome to NBP Actions 8 Monochrome Tools. Now, as you can see, I have the actions already open here on the right. There's a lot of them. We're going to talk about the LUTs as well, but let's go ahead and just kind of give you an idea and the philosophy of what all this is about. All right, so in the world of black and white photography, in the digital world, we don't have to shoot black and white. There's a few cameras that shoot straight black and white on their sensors right out of camera, but for the most part, we do a black and white conversion or a monochrome conversion, right? And doing it in RAW, Capture One or Lightroom, or even ACR is great, good stuff. But sometimes we want to do a black and white conversion in Photoshop. There's going to be more flexibility, more options to create, different looks and ideas. And I've been making, actions for black and white conversion for a long time because I have a lot of general approaches that I like to do. And I'm always exploring. To be honest, the actions I put together for the monochrome set here, I probably could have done 5 times as many. There's always something to play with. And that is the philosophy of all this. So before we go showing you all of it, I just want to mention that again. The philosophy here is to play and explore. This is why there's so many of them. On top of that, the end result that you get from every action, which you'll see in a minute, the end result that you get is always modifiable. Any layers that I've used in that particular action are there for you to change, right? So we have some tips and tricks on that. There's a lot, so I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but there's a lot of variations just on them. But the whole point, the whole idea is explore. Let's dig right in. So first and foremost, we start with NBP Monochrome Basic 1 through 5. So if I tap any of these, you get a result immediately. And if you look at the situation, what I have here clearly is a black and white adjustment layer, and then you tweak some of these colors around. This is just a general setting that I will start with pretty often. As you can see, it's a black and white result. Now, right out of the gate, let me show you the difference. I'm going to go ahead and put a desaturation layer, or rather hue and saturation, with the saturation all the way down. This is what the shot looks like with the color removed. That's it, as you can see. Turn that off and turn on the black and white converter. See that? It's a different look. That's the other premise of this entire kit, is to make sure you have choices so you can explore. You can absolutely explore manually, but sometimes pushing these buttons gets you cool stuff. So Basic 2, for example, same tool, slightly different look. Play with it and adjust. Basic 3, now that has a folder because that has the monochrome black and white adjustment layer, but it also has a compression layer on top. We'll talk about compression layers in a second. But see, that's just another look. As I'm going through these, I want you to notice how the looks just vary a little bit. The ones that pop out with folders mean there's different tools available. This one has a brightness and contrast boost, so you can adjust exactly what you're after. If you feel you like that look but want more contrast, there you go. Very basic stuff. Basic 5, again, same thing. We have a folder open. Always explore what's inside the folder. So in this case, we have some blend diff going on here to modify things. So, here's a little bit of compression on the highlights and compression on the shadows, etc., and then overall compression on top. It's just a way to play around. Don't forget, sometimes there's a desaturation layer at the bottom like this. Sometimes there's a black and white converter. Sometimes there's a gradient map. It's all for slight variations on looks. So let's go to the next one. It's kind of quick. Boost 1, obviously just a little bit more contrast, but a lot of times the actions that I've created do different things in terms of the different RGB channels. So they're not just more or less contrast in a desaturated image. They're all kinds of different vibes, and I want you to explore and play with them. Boost 2, similar story again. We have different tools you can play with. Looks like I've got some highlights. I say it looks like because sometimes I forget. I got some highlights, blend if you will, in there. See that? Just for a certain specific range. You can play with that if you want. And you can always mess with the blend if as well. Always encourage you to use these actions, any NBP actions, in a manner that you can adjust once you get a result. When your eye says, oh, I like that, but I wish I could do X, Y, Z. Do it. Do it. Don't just take the action at that face value. Depth 1, as you can see, just a little bit of a deeper tone, a little flatter on the shadows, etc. Let's quickly go through depth 2, which even though the result might be same, the tools are slightly different. There's a curves involved in this one, for example. Who knows what you can change with that, right? The other two are pretty much the same. Shine is, I called it shine because there's 5 of them, because it generally creates a little bit of a brighter look. So there's a lot of the other actions in LUTs, but these create a stronger contrast, bright look. Every single one, again, guys, open them up, check out the tools in question, and play around with them. This is why I'm going through this kind of quick, because your eye needs to, give you what you want. You see it and you go, yes, I like that. Or you like it and then you tweak it. There's Shine 3. As you can see, it's pretty bright, right? So it goes on from there. HD, this is sort of a misnomer, but it's fun. It's just that we're brightening the highlights with blend diff, or rather darkening the highlights and brightening the shadows with blend diff. You can continue to tweak this any way you want and get sort of a, overly compressed HD look. On this shot, not so much, but on other shots, which will open up in a minute, we're about to shift to, it could make a radical difference, right? So let's do that. Let's go ahead and close this one. Let's open up this more of a headshot, and let's see what happens when we run the same HD action. Okay, as you can see, we get a result. We can tone down the highlights if we really want, and we can pull up the shadows if we really want, and we get kind of like that HD-ish look. And then we have a curves layer that has an auto contrast on it, but we can adjust that. Look, that's a look. Delete it if you don't like it. Go on to Haze 1. There's a look. You know, sometimes you have a use for something like that. What about Haze 2? It's a little softer. I mean, a little more dark, actually. In Haze 3, a little more contrast, but hazy. And then Haze Extreme, you know. Look, you look at this, you might think, I'll never use that. Someone else might go, I love that. It could also be exactly what you need. Dusk is the opposite, a little more muted, a little less contrast and darker. Okay, and there's several different dusk options, as you can see, right? And then Dusk Extreme, just a little deeper. So these things can make big, big changes. Now, the next one's Gritty. I'm really going to try that one, I think, on something that might lend itself more to it, like this one. There we go. Let's try Gritty. Here we go. Gritty 1. It's going to think a little bit, and if we look carefully, which we'll have to zoom in, you'll see that we have some noise and some grit and some mess on the shot. See that? Okay, that's Gritty 1. And then Gritty 2, same sort of thing, but slightly different energy. Okay, as you can see, it's just a little bit more contrasty. Okay, and then Gritty 3, another variation as well. It just has heavy, heavy contrast, and it keeps the grit focused on the low end through a blend if. So the Gritty noise mostly on the shadows and avoiding the highlights, and then Gritty 4 is the opposite of that, wherein the highlights are having the grain, and as it gets darker and darker, there's not so much grain due to blend if. These are not something you're supposed to notice and go, oh look, the grain is only on the shadows. No, it just creates a different look. This is the premise. Again, creativity, exploration. No, you know, these aren't technical things. These are fun things that look cool. Swirl 1, these are called Swirl because generally speaking, I have a desaturation layer to do the black and white, but under them, I'll have RGB curves or RGB levels. In other words, I go to curves or levels and I modify the R, G, and B. When you do this, you get a shift. You see how it doesn't just get brighter or darker? It creates a sort of swirling effect when you play with the RGB channels and with the black and white above it. You see that swirl, right? That's where I named this from. That was the inspiration. I kind of felt like it creates this weird swirling thing. I'm not saying that the name makes sense, but it's cool. And it just creates, again, a different energy for your black and white. Let's look at Swirl 3. You can play with those settings again. Swirl 4, Swirl 2. And again, you have tools underneath, not just the desaturation layer and the RGB curves in this case, but you have an auto con on top to balance things out. You don't want that, you can turn it off. You can play with it. You have a compressor on top, which you can play with. Again, we'll talk about compressors in a minute. The whole point here is exploration. High con, very obvious. High contrast, extra compression. That's a little overcooked look. We have a lot of those, including the LUTs, that have that overcooked black and white look. Sometimes that's very useful for the vibe you want, and sometimes it's good when your shot is really low contrast and dark. That'll wake it right up. Flat is the opposite. If you have a high contrast shot, it'll tone it down, or if you just want a flat look, right? Mixer is interesting because you leverages the same concept where there's a black and white adjustment layer to do the black and white converting, but there's a channel mixer underneath. This is not because there's a specific technical reason for it, but so you can play with it. Again, this creates sort of that swirling effect because we're playing with RG and B, and you can get different results in your black and white just by playing around. You never know what you'll get. Look at that. Her dress is darker than all the other shadows. You could not do that with another method, at least not that directly. Who knows? That's the whole point of this. Now, once you get past these, and starting on subject 1 going down, at least for a few of them, they start to utilize the AI of subject selection in Photoshop. So when you hit these, they're going to tell you, you got to start in a flattened layer or, stamped layer of your latest, wherever you are in your workflow, as it says, okay? Because it's got to use that layer to get the subject. So in this case, it has done that. Let's see what happened, okay? So it may or may not succeed on this shot. As you can see, it didn't. It kind of saw the subject as the door. It's not the end of the world, but it sort of works. Let's go ahead and go to another image, Joe. Have a little better chance at that. White background, we might get another image beyond this, but let's see. Subject 2, let's go to that one. Again, it's going to warn you that you have to be on a flattened layer. So what this one does is it brightens the subject, and it darkens the background. Now in this case, it's a little bit strange because it's a studio shot. It doesn't exactly work exactly like we want. Let's try it on something a little bit more environmental and see what we get. See what this does. So we're going to go to subject 2. This one's pretty extreme. I know that's because when I designed it, it was extreme. But the entire point, if you turn these off, everything is a little more even. You turn these 2 layers on, your subject sticks out. One thing I like doing is highlighting both layers and then choosing an arbitrary, sort of opacity, like 70%. Now I've got 70% of both of them, right? So it went from this, which is a pretty look. Don't get me wrong. It's beautiful. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. It's beautiful. But now we make her a little stronger, the background a little darker within reason. And if you balance it, it can make a very powerful look in your black and white conversion. And of course, you can keep playing from there. By the way, you can always add layers, So if you hear like, I like this, but I feel like I need to add a curves and do some curving. Okay, well, curve away, buddy. Put it in the folder. Change the opacity. There you go. Boom. Now we have an awesome black and white conversion. Always, always adjust. As it goes from there, now that we have this outdoor one, let's look at deep sky. We'll go to deep sky 1. It uses Photoshop's AI sky selection and does a general black and white conversion, but it makes sure to put a little extra attention on darkening your sky. Always, like a lot of my actions, it overdoes it, but then you can change the opacity to what you need. So that's sort of a normal black and white conversion, and this is one with a deeper sky. This can be very dramatic on a shot or very subtle depending on the shot, and there's 3 variations. Subject contrast, that exactly what it sounds like. It makes sure the subject is separated and contrast is added via blend if, as you can see with the brightening on and off and the darkening on and off. Okay, so it looks like the selection got a little bit crazy with the subject selection, but that's okay. It still works, still gets the point across, and it still makes the subject a little more contrasty. That doesn't bother me. You can go in and adjust these masks as you need and as you want. Now, let's go. Tonal con shadows. This is interesting, and it's going to be hard to see on video, but if we zoom in, you'll see that what's happened here is it's done a blend if with some high pass work on a duplicate layer, and it adds tonal contrast, a really strong tonal contrast to the shadows. So you can see there's the original, and there it is, or rather there it is black and white, and here it is a tonal contrast. And what does that look like? Let's see. Off, on, off, on. It's sort of it is a sharpening effect, a high pass sharpening effect, but done a little bit higher and then blended in nicely with blend if only into the shadows. So it just creates a depth to your shadows that you need to do lightly though. It can add noise to your image in an unwanted way. And then because the monochrome layer is on top, you can always take that effect and reduce it. Reduce the opacity or whatever you need to do. But it's a cool little effect. It looks better on your screen than on video. So trust me on that. Pretty cool. Next up, we have the deep skin ones, which is pretty popular, what people like to do when they do a black and white conversion, at least in modeling images. So this one's called deep skin. It's going to separate the subject as well and then work to deepen the skin, at least to a certain degree. As you can see, it's really making the background kind of messed up, but it gets the job done. We'll find another image to do some of these tests on as well. Deep skin shift, simply the same process with some variations, so you can get just a different variation. You never know what kind of feel you might like. Okay, deep skin extra. This is obviously the same function, but a little bit deeper, or a lot deeper, as you can see. So I went from that to that. Now, it does work better on some other images. We will have to load some up in a second. So we'll do that in a minute, but I want to show you subject plus background control. So this one, it just simply does a desaturation, okay? And, it does use a black and white conversion layers. But we have the subject now available to us to control individually, and then we have the background available to us to control individually, okay? So we can do all kinds of things to the background as we see fit, whatever we feel is necessary. And there's also, general curve adjustments on top of that. There's a compressor on each one. So on her, for example, we can brighten highlights, darken the shadows, and then on the adjuster, maybe we can brighten that a bit. Cool. We're just controlling the subject and the background independently and doing different black and white conversions on them, right? And to that end, we also have the subject LUT. That's going to allow us to apply a LUT to the subject, which we'll get to when we talk about LUTs in a minute. Okay. Now these monochrome random grad con 1. In other words, it's going to create a random gradient, just like the color ones, action 6. So when this opens up, the first thing it tells you is, hey, here's a random gradient, but you come here, you open up the gradient editor, and you repeatedly hit randomize. It literally is going to pick all kinds of random grays and then blend them in until you find a contrast that you think works for you. So you click and click and click, and if something catches your eye like that, then you go with it. It could be normal, it could be wild, but there it is. You have your desaturation, of course, and then you have this random amount of contrast. At any moment, you can open up the gradient editor again and hit randomize repeatedly until you get something that you like. That's a little bit darker. This is just for exploration again. It's a pretty common end result, but it's a way to just push buttons and see what you get. There's also a variation on it, Grad Con 2, that uses a different blending mode. So the effect is generally a little bit stronger. Okay, a little more higher contrast. Okay, but you can still play until you get something that excites you. That you go, yes, I like that. We have a random grad deep. In other words, it's going to randomize, but everything's going to be darker in your randomization. You won't get a random bright one in this because it's designed only for depth, for deeper tones. And the opposite's true. We have a bright one that does the same thing. You hit randomize and you get a bunch of brighter random effects. Quite literally random, utilizing Photoshop's random generator for gradient maps. Now, with all of that said, I think we should talk about real quick the bottom 4 utility functions. Let's go ahead and put one of these on that's pretty intense. Like, let's go for the high con one. High con extra, boom. We like that, but let's say we want to soften it up. We want to compress. Compress is where we take in a linear fashion. We take the shadows up and the highlights down. Linear meaning that we're not brightening on a curve or anything like that. We're not doing anything auto. We're taking the darkest point and bringing it up linearly, which means that you can't have pure black in a shot. Now, this action we already ran has compression on it, but let's say we want it more. Well, we click on the top layer and we can choose compress low, medium, high, or extra. Let's compress medium because low probably won't be visible on the video. Let's compress medium. Boom. As you can see, immediately the shadows got softer, but so did the highlights, because what is this layer? This adjustment layer? It is at levels, whereas the output levels are taken into 10, and the output levels of the highlights were taken down to 245, right? So that's easy. That's an easy compression. Compress high. This is 15 and 240. See that? You can type in these numbers on your own, but these are just quick push button ways to get a result. Let's go there. And now we can go compress extra. This is actually kind of new. I haven't had a compressor this strong on my actions before. Okay, so you may or may not want to use these, but it's great because if you are playing around, like I said, if you come here and you go, oh, let's go to high con, and you do like it, and you're just like, well, it's a little strong. So you just quickly scroll down here, compress medium, and now you've softened it. Done. See how easy that is? That's the whole point. Very, very exciting things. Now, let's go ahead and open up a different image to talk about the deep skin, as well as some images specific to some of the glow functions I'm going to show you, because the glow functions can look really corny, or they can actually look really cool in your black and white conversion based on the shot. Let's open up another image to see. Okay, so we have another image open. This one actually is a really good example to show why the actions are so beneficial. For example, if I were to choose Deep Skin Extra, this one down here, okay, if I run that one, got to make sure you're on a stamped layer. Background's fine, but a stamped layer. It's going to darken her skin via a black and white adjustment layer that darkens the reds and yellows. However, if that mask wasn't on here choosing just a subject, you would darken everything else. And if I hold down shift to look at the, turn off the mask on that, you see everything gets really dark. That's fine, except now with this on here, what's happened is that it makes her skin tone look deeper and darker without modifying the background. That's the entire premise of it. And that's the extra one. You can also just go for the sort of regular one. It needs to have a stamped layer as a reminder, but as you can see, it makes sure that she has a little bit more depth to her, right? Very, very cool. There's also one, called Deep Skin Extra, Deep Skin Con. Deep Skin Con is a little bit different because you might like that depth, but then you have a way to, dodge your highlights, as you can see here. We can brighten them up even more if we want. It's on the blend if, so you can see we just add a little more shaping if we feel we lost that shaping. And of course we can adjust what the blend if is doing. So it's just a way to add contrast when you deepen the skin. You may or may want less or want more, but there it is. Now, this shot does have a natural backlit sun in it, right? So there it is. So I want to show you guys what these do. This is NBP Monochrome Glow 1 and 2. This one creates a black and white effect, but it also creates a glow effect, as you can see. Okay, it always comes in a little too strong, but you can adjust it. Not only can you adjust the opacity, but it's a smart filter on the Gaussian blur. So you can choose how much blur you want. So let's say I put 100, tones it down. And then I go from the 65% default to like 40. Okay, and now I have a black and white conversion that sort of accentuates the glow. This is why I said it can look corny on a shot that doesn't already have glow, because it just looks like a soft filter, but it accentuates the glow rather than downplaying it. Okay, and that's why glow number 2 also exists, just slightly different settings, slightly different look. But again, you have the smart filter with the Gaussian blur, and you can make it as soft as you want. There it is, 400 pixels. Autocon, compression on top as well. Of course, you can always play around with this until you get exactly what you want, especially with opacity, right? So that's really cool. And then the other ones are just for fun, like glow effects. We'll turn that one on. This one just does a little bit more radical. It has a motion blur as well as a Gaussian blur on it. You can play with both, and you can definitely change the opacity. It's just a little bit more of a radical effect that you can play with and adjust any other settings. And then glow effects extra. This is just more of an experiment on my part. It does all the glowing effects, but it also adds some grain and grit and streaking. As you can see, it's got some smart filters going on there that I recommend that you play with. I know it's hard to see that, so we're going to zoom in a little bit so you can see what's going on. It's a little bit of noise, makes it look kind of vintagey. It's got some weird striping on the sides there. It's just a cool look. It's a look that you probably don't want to do 40,000 times, but the whole point is to adjust. You can take any of these motion blurs, double click them, change their angle, and hit OK, and then now it reprocesses it, and you have a slightly different look. This one you can also change angles, and who knows what you end up with as you play with this. See, now I've got like a hatch pattern on top. So that's just one type of look you can play with. But the whole premise that I want to show you is that when you already have a glow in your image, that's where these glow functions come in. Now, this is a fairly high contrast shot. So for example, if I hit monochrome flat, as you can see, it softens and flattens it out if that's the look that I want. Keep in mind too, usually the what do you call it? The desaturation effect is usually the first one I do on these actions. That way things on top can be played with. Okay, so if you don't like the way this medium flat curve is flattening, you can hit the opacity of it and change how much it's flattening. If you don't like this color right here flattening so much, you can change that. You can constantly change the opacity above the desaturation layer. But if you change the opacity of the desaturation layer, color comes into play, which is fine if that's what you want. But you just should be aware of that. Very, very important. And this is going to be hugely important when we talk about LUTs. Okay, so the LUTs do some cool stuff because they're embedded with all these pretty interesting effects that I created over the last few months that I like to use quite frequently. But a LUT is a single layer. So let me show you what I mean. By the way, there's a video on YouTube to show you how to install your LUTs. So if you don't know how to do that. So let's go ahead. What is a LUT? It's a lookup table. And we're going to go to the color lookup adjustment layer. Now on my Photoshop, I've already gone in and deleted all the defaults. I've already put in my Fray Array color grading LUTs from the Actions Pack 6 well in here into Photoshop. And as you can see, I also have all the new monochrome LUTs in here. They're all here. Okay. LUTs are interesting because they're created from multiple layers, multiple adjustment layers, and then output. You get the exact result that I intended with the adjustment layers. And they create, in my opinion, a little more dynamic look. But let me show you what I mean. Since we just talked about modification and adjustment of your adjustment layers, the difference here is that this is one look. So for example, if I were to go to cross blend and I get an effect and I think to myself, oh, I like it, but I don't necessarily like how strong it is. I want to reduce the opacity. Well, you go 60% and here comes your color. However, it's pretty solvable. Okay. One, you can go underneath your color lookup table layer and put the saturation all the way down. It will modify your look a little bit depending on what the lookup table is doing. But now as you change your opacity, it stays gray. Okay. You can also do the same thing if you want to put it on top, a slightly different variation. You can put the desaturation layer on top, play around back and forth, because depending on the specific LUT you're using, it could change a few things here and there. So here we are at 50%. I'm going to go back to 100 and go back to our LUTs and take a look at them. These are absolutely for exploration and fun, okay? Because, you know, they're called gloomy and haze and high-low and things like that. Gloomy is pretty intense. This is one of those examples where reducing the opacity might be cool. As a reminder, as I play with these, LUTs are also available for video applications. So you can apply these to all your video projects if you like them. Con extreme, look at that. That's extreme. And that's a more of a utility function, but it may be exactly what you need, right? Clipped. This one's called clipped. It's just really, really bright. As in clipped, bright, you know, overexposed. Black diamond. What does that do? You can see it's a deep, hazy look. Black shadow is going to be even darker. See that? You might think, Nino, these are useless. No, they're not useless. On this shot, they're not working. But another shot, who knows what they could do? You should always play around with all of them, because you might find something that you really like. Look at that one. It's called high con. It just creates a kind of a vintage vibe. IR style or infrared style. It's sort of that. Not really. It's not actually infrared, so don't come at me, my infrared shooters, but it's just inspired by that. Light bright. Another one there. Sunburn. We do have some swirls here as well. They were created with the swirl idea in mind, to swirl colors around, as we talked about a minute ago. Okay. Too much con. I guess that was me being silly, but that's fun. White heat. Connotations aside, as you can see the result you get there, very high contrast glowing the whites. Something here called glare. I say something because some of these I made so long ago I don't remember. It's kind of a haze with a little bit of contrast. High-low haze, that's interesting. As you can see, it puts a haze in the middle and then brights and darks to the absolute extreme. You can change the opacity of that. Regardless, the whole point of this entire exercise is to play, and play. And that's why these color lookup tables, these LUTs, are so exciting, because you can just constantly keep exploring and who knows what you'll find. Yeah, in a pinch, you can go haze, and then you can duplicate that, and then you can come here and go light bright. And you have one on top of another. It's not impossible, and the looks could be subtle and they could be radically different. There's no way of actually knowing what you're going to get until you play with it. Okay, so who knows what you may do, and changing the order of the two different lookup tables could change looks as well. You notice I'm not stopping necessarily to say this is the look you need on this shot. I don't know. I'm just showing you random things, because that's the entire premise of this whole entire action set, is to play and explore and see what you may find. There's, I don't know, 50 or 60 choices and about 30, 35 LUTs. It's the whole point is to give you inspiration and get excited about black and white conversion, because one thing I hear from my students all the time is, I just hit desaturate, or I use a plugin. Nothing wrong with that if you got the look that you want. But playing around with these not only will get you some exploration, some inspiration, but also help teach you. There might be functions in here, like when I mentioned swirl, maybe the idea of putting a desaturation layer above an RGB, above levels, and then playing with the RGB, maybe that didn't occur to you before. And now you're like, oh, so maybe the actions can teach you something. I try to make them as diverse and open-ended as possible, so you can get excited, you can get motivated and inspired, but then maybe you can learn something. And these are always there. I don't use them every single shot, especially if I'm, don't know if I want black and white yet, which we all do. But when I bust them out, it's time for me to play and explore. Sometimes even I created these actions, I created these LUTs, they're my own photos, but when I run an action that I created on a photo, sometimes the black and white conversion is exactly what I didn't know I wanted. It's so like, oh, wow, that looks amazing. I didn't consider that before. So play around with them, try them all, get excited. You might find favorites based on the style of work that you do. You may not. You might be able to learn something from them. But anyway, I hope you enjoy that. If you have any questions, drop me an email or leave a comment. And I hope you like Actions 8 Monochrome Tools.